Thank you. Our speaker today is Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller, an ordained New Thought minister with degrees in multiple sciences and a previous career as a futurist, which I'd like to chat more about sometime. She is the author of over 25 books, the director of research at Gaia Living Systems Institute, and host of the radio program Noetic Moments, where she explains what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be different if we understood it. As spiritual leader of Ocean Unity Church, Reverend Ruth provides classes and counseling services, as well as regular Sunday talks. This is Memorial Day weekend, and the day was originally created to remember those who had fallen in battle. Now, however, we honor all family and friends and loved ones who've passed. This morning, Reverend Ruth Miller explores with us how and why our love and friendships continue on both sides of the veil.
All right.
Dr. Ruth.
Thank you. We'll have to change that intro. It's getting old, right? Oh, my nice. How nice to see you all. Terrific to be here. I'm in Oregon. Oregon's a nice place to be. A number of my Oregon friends have almost every year of their lives gone out and decorated the tombstones of past friends and families in various cemeteries. And my grandchildren almost always go out the few days before Memorial Day and put flags on the gravestones at the local military cemetery. And at Christmas time, they put wreaths on them. How many of us grew up putting flowers on tombstones? Yeah. And a lot of movies lately, I'm intrigued, show someone going to the grave of someone with flowers and having conversations with the people there. I've been seeing that more and more lately. I think there's a renewed awareness that we are still connected, even though the body is not fully present to us. Yes. Now, if I were a 1930s, 30 or 40-year-old archaeologist, I'd be saying, well, that's ancestor worship. In fact, when we see it in any other culture, archaeologists, anthropologists call it ancestor worship. Isn't that interesting? The Day of the Dead is ancestor worship. The New Year's obligation in Asian countries to go and sit with the folks who have passed on and bring them flowers and maybe even bring them, share a meal in their presence is considered ancestor worship. Unfortunately, I think those guys got it wrong. I think we need to recognize that we all know that those who have gone before, who we have ever connected with in any loving way, are still with us and still connected with us. And when we look at those cultures, including our own, where we honor and respect those who've passed before, most of those cultures are places where you don't move a lot. So the home you lived in may have been occupied by your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your seventh great-grandparents. I know one of my Florence folks went home to where his family had come from, and they're still occupying the same house 1,000 years later in Italy. Isn't that amazing? So when one is surrounded by the things that people have created for us for several hundred years, and perhaps as one of the folks on one of the tours that I went along finds a castle that's been occupied for 600 years and has things from all of those eras in it, right? That they're, some of it is almost 1,000 years old and some of it was bought 2 weeks ago, right? And yes, so you're feeling the presence of the energy and the care and the support of the people who have gone before when you allow for that possibility. Americans don't do that. Very few of us even are living in the homes that our parents put together, much less grandparents, great-grandparents. There are about a dozen century farms still in Oregon that have been farmed by the same family for 100 years. That's old, unless you've been to Europe, right? So how do we reckon or, put together or reconcile the cultural belief that the only thing that matters is what's happening now and the cultural tradition of honoring what's happened in the past? We don't. And so we have this break, we have this split in our culture, where on one day a year, or maybe on a birthday or an anniversary, we're allowed to reconnect with those who have gone before. A lot of folks who are still in the working world, when someone passes in their family, they're given a whole 2 weeks before they have to go back to work full time. Ow. Ow. It's always difficult when the physical form of someone we really care about is not with us anymore. That's hard, isn't it? We reach for them and they're not there. I watched the movie The Man Called Otto, and that's a big part of the movie. He reaches for his wife and she's not there. It's always hard. And yet, if we really allow ourselves to go inside, we've never really disconnected from them. They're never really absent. I have referred to many times in my talks the grandmother that had been in India and I spent my weekends with growing up, and then moved in with us when I was a teenager. And she passed 53 years ago. And yet in my feeling, in my life, and as I present her, she's just down in San Francisco. I haven't seen her lately, right? And that's how it is inside us, yeah? They're not gone. They're just not physically available to our senses. But if we acknowledge what unity teaches, what we sense isn't real anyway. What's real is the essence, the spirit, the oneness that we all are. My family has had active duty military in every war since the French and Indian War that the US has been engaged in. And I just recently saw a photo of my daughter in her camis in Afghanistan a few years back. And the thing that we talk about on Memorial Day is the great sacrifice that's being done, the great, the brave acts of people who have gone off and done this. And in my family, it was never an act of courage, it was an act of duty. It was, there's a need, I'll show up. When I was a Navy wife, that was what was going on for them, except for the ones that were dodging the draft, not drafting the dodge. They dodged the draft by joining the Navy. They didn't want to crawl in the mud, so they swam in the water. And yet at another level, mostly what they were doing was just showing up where it was needed, because that's how the world is. When we turn folks who are on active duty into special heroes, we're actually doing a bit of disservice to themselves and to us, to them and to us, because they are human beings being called to do what they feel need to do. They feel called to do it. They are doing it. And all the folks that I've talked to that have been overseas, including the time when my husband and our friends were all overseas, some of that time was the most intensely alive time they ever had in their life. They were paying attention. They were fully present. They were feeling the energy of the moment. And sometimes it was scary, but a lot of times it was just plain living. alive, fully present. And so that's part of why you'll see 80, 90-year-old men choosing to be with each other over just about anybody else out in the world, because those guys knew what that felt like to be there at that time when they were 18 and 19 and 20 and maybe as old as 25. That would have been the old man. Wow. Yeah. So when we honor those who have died in service, we're really saying, I honor that in all of us, which is willing to show up and be fully alive in the moment where it is most terrifying to be alive. And how many people have had that experience on the operating table, trying to avoid an accident, trying to make sure that some situation doesn't fall apart in their responsibility that they're responsible for. Fully alive, fully present, showing up in spite of the odds. We all are that. The word unity came out of a meditation after Charles had been trying to figure out what to call what they were doing for several years. He'd gone through several different names. And he was in a meditation in a group about this size in the building that they had created for classes and meditations and for printing this book, the Daily Word, and more. And he suddenly sprung up and he says, unity. And everyone goes, what? We are one being. There is only one presence, and we are that. And that presence is eternal. It is not limited in space and time. And we are that. So we all are those young men going into battle. We all are the people who managed to prevent an accident or an awful thing that might have happened. We all are the ancestors who have created the space for us. Our grandparents and great-grandparents, many of whom were immigrants to this country, came here not knowing the language, many of them, came here having no idea what it meant to come into a world that was primarily to them, wilderness. And they simply honored the call to serve. They did what was needed to be done, step after step after step. Pretty amazing when you think about it. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been hanging out with people from about 60 different countries, speaking as many different languages, trying to learn English, trying to create a new life for themselves, many of them in a country they had never thought they would ever live in. People from Ghana, from Yemen, and the Slavic countries, Slovakia, people from Indonesia, the Philippines, all over the world, Argentina, Jamaica. The Jamaicans had a little easier. They were sort of understood English, but then they had to learn how to speak it in a way that anyone else could understand it. And every one of them has had their moment of feeling like there is no way I could possibly survive what I'm doing and what I'm showing up. And every one of them is us. We are all they, and they are us. Pogo said that was our enemy. No, the they is us. I figured it out. Charles Fillmore knew we are one unity. So every one of these beings trying to make it in a totally different land, or trying to survive on the battlefield, or trying to survive this terribly scary situation, is us. There is no separation. There is no distinction. Isn't that interesting? So when we go to put flowers at a tombstone, or flags, or when we wish well or honor the anniversary or the birthday of someone who has passed, we're really honoring the one that we all are. We're never disconnected. And there's more to it than that, because when we begin to understand that there is no separation, we're not disconnected, then we begin to have a new set of senses open up. A set of senses that are not the physical senses. There are inner senses, our inner awareness, our inner knowing, our inner seeing, and our inner hearing. Yesterday, I was helping a woman, a newly widowed woman, plan the ceremony, the celebration of life for her husband, who happens to be Indonesian. And we did that. And then she said, all right, tell me about it. What's he experiencing? Someone had contacted her and said that she'd been in contact with him and that he was very happy. Now, he was a devout atheist. He was absolutely sure that candle goes out, that's it, but he's very happy. So we talked about it a bit and talked about how she can know and feel his presence. Some years ago, I was going to work in a new town and just decided to rent a room while I was figuring out what I was going to do. And I contacted this woman and it was all very weird and magical. And I ended up renting a room in her place. And every day I would come home for work and she wouldn't be there. And she would come home a couple hours later from a nursing home. And after about 6 weeks, she came home in tears and he had passed. The love of her life had passed. And we had long conversations about how that felt and what that meant and whether he was still on the whether he was still around in some way. Well, this man had had a tremor and they had been dating for maybe 2 or 3 years before his accident. And the first time he showed up at her door, he came with a bouquet of roses, but he had a tremor. Between the car and the door, all of the petals landed on the sidewalk. He came with stems with a few petals. Well, she would go on places they'd walk together and other kinds of things like that. And one day she was on the hill and she just stopped to feel how much she had loved him. And she went on and she came back down the hill. There had not met anyone either direction. And where she had stopped were some rose petals. She scattered his ashes in a lot of places and over the next year. And one day she went up to Silver Falls in there, and there's that trail that goes behind the waterfall in the cave. And she decided this was where a good place for the last of his ashes. So with a little bit of tears in her eyes, she's scattering the last of his ashes. She closes her eyes. And someone calls her name and she opens her eyes and there's rose petals. We are never alone. We are never separate from the people who we feel that love connection with. I know, hawks and eagles. Yes. We can be aware in any number of ways. It can be that something shifts and changes. Usually the folks on the other side can handle electronics better than rose petals. So there may be shifts in electronics because they're essentially energy now. They're not gone. They're energy bodies with a little bit of matter. There's a scene in Ghost, the movie Ghost, where Patrick Swayze is trying to move the penny, right? It's because he's energy and it's matter. And he has to bring enough energy into his determination to make it happen, Like the guy in the subway who's making all kinds of things happen, right? The poltergeist kind of guy, right? They're perfectly capable of doing it, but it is a lot of energy, and they think it's their own energy, so they don't do it very often. Just as we think doing something with our energy is our own energy, instead of realizing it's all divine energy. It's all divine energy. It's all one unity. Whether we're on the side of the veil that is all matter, or on the side of the veil that's all energy, all loving energy, all giving, supporting, blissful energy. It's all one. It's all one. So on Memorial Day, we have the opportunity to recognize we've never been separated from any of these people, from any of our ancestors, from any of those soldiers, from any of the people that we've ever loved. We may not feel the body present, and we may not hear their humor, and we may not do that, but sometimes you can. The first step is recognize the friendship, the love continues regardless of the form of the relationship. As that little song said, goes on forever, forever. The connection is eternal. The forms, they come and go. And that's how it is. And guess what? There's more and more evidence that we'll get to be in form with them again in some way or other. But in the meantime, they're here. We have access to them anytime, anywhere. You just relax into knowing that it's possible. And taking flowers to a tombstone or sharing a meal with the people that we've been resonating with or that we feel have contributed to our life is an opening to it. And when we know that who we are is the one soul being, the spirit that is in all beings always, then we can feel all that love that we thought might have been lost here and now and always. For so it truly is. Thank you for listening. And breathe. You want to meditate? Yes. Go somewhere back. Right. Thank you, JR. To breathe and relax into this body, allowing the heart that has been touched to simply release and let go. We need not hold on. We need to relax and allow. And so we breathe. And we allow the life that is to flow through this body. And we allow that life knowing that it is one life for all beings. It is a life that is shared among all beings everywhere, always. And it is moving in and through our bodies now. In and through our hearts and souls, enlivening us and lifting us to a new level of being and understanding. And as we relax and release and allow that life to flow in and through us, we realize that the energy of that life is love. And that love is everywhere present, throughout all forms of being, moving and becoming more fully, blissfully loved in us, through us, and around us, in all the ways of all the beings we feel any connection with. We can relax and allow that love to be fully present here and now. The love that seemed to be confined to one relationship now expands into allness everywhere. That same love. The love and the delight and the joy that came from some interactions now expand into all forms of being, all delightful moments of being. This love, this life, we breathe in and through our lives and our world. And we allow our senses to be opened so that we may always know the presence of the love. Always feel the joy of that presence. Always be ready to hear the wisdom that is available to you through the lives of those who have gone before and through the heart of wisdom that is who we are. Simply because we breathe. So knowing we are in and of the one love, knowing that we are the one light, we allow ourselves to become more fully who we are and how we are, and recognize and feel the constant connection with all those who have ever loved us and whom we have ever loved, who resonate with us though we may never have met them, who feel the same feelings and seek the same things, that loving experience and knowing it is who and what we are. All of us. One. Unity. Here. Now. And always. For so it is. So I take another breath, a breath of commitment that this is how my path unfolds for all of us. As I say the word, Amen. Blessed be.
Thank you, Dr. Ruth. Good to have you back home.
Thank you, sir.